Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Liz Karberg, a senior research scientist at Child Trends and fatherhood researcher. I apologize for not being on camera. I'm having some technical difficulties, but hopefully that will not interfere with an engaging talk I anticipate ahead of us. Today, we're going to be talking about how you can support young fathers' engagement with their children. Starting us off is my colleague, Victor St. John. I'll let him introduce himself and get us started.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Victor St. John. I'm a research scientist with Child Trends. Quick note, I'm only called Victor if I'm in trouble, so for today it's Vic for short. I have about 8 years of experience in the criminal and juvenile justice field with direct experience in government oversight, program implementation and evaluation, as well as mental health service provision and providing structured education for this population. And with that, much of my work with young fathers and parenting programs are heavily couched within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, and admittedly skewed towards engaging this group of young fathers. So moving with our slide on the roadmap for today's talk, today's presentation is tailored to provide guidance around supporting young fathers' engagement in their child's life. This will include information on who are young fathers' perspectives, what shapes their involvement with their children, tips for supporting young fathers' engagement with their children in prep programming, and we blocked out some time at the end for question and answers and to point you to more resources. So on our slide on who are young fathers, generally a young father can be defined within 3 parameters, so gender, age, and having a parental role. So within those parameters, a young father is a man who's a parent to 1 or more children, typically age 20 or younger, and at times older if their partner is a teen. And when looking at some more characteristics, young fathers typically have their first child in their late teenage years and early 20s. They are also often in romantic relationships with the child's mother prior to childbirth. However, the romantic relationship often deteriorates or ends by the child's first birthday, along with involvement in their child's life. Now, to be clear, alongside less involvement in a child's life, young fathers do express wanting involvement in their children's life. We'll tease that out some more a bit later. This want to be involved is important, especially when considering the potential youth outcomes that are there. In other words, a young father's engagement with their children can directly positively influence a child's well-being. For instance, youth who maintain relationships with their father have better outcomes in their education, employment, they're less likely to be depressed, less likely to become a teenage parent themselves, and less likely to be criminally convicted. So, interesting enough, that brings us to our next slide. What do young fathers have to say about being the father? And I'd like to lead here with quotes from young fathers highlighting the positive role that they want to and can play in the lives of their children from their own perspective. So in the first quote up on the slide, it's from the AIM for Teens Mom study. AIM for Teen Moms, quick summary, is an evidence-based intervention to reduce rapid repeat pregnancies among teen moms by helping teen mothers define specific life aspirations, engage in planning to successfully achieve them, and to consider the role of contraception in their lives. So looking at the quote here, being a good father is always being there for your family and significant other as well. Family always comes first, and you will know how to love and care for your children. Here, being a good father is twofold in its definition, by being there or being present for their child and their significant other. And we'll touch on this point in a bit as well. Looking at the second quote, this is from the Parents and Children Together evaluation, and in short, also known as PACT. In short, it's a federally funded evaluation of various programs funded by the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood Initiative. And in this quote, the father says, "The program taught me that if you can't be there financially, you still need to be there mentally. They connected a whole lot of the dots for me. Just being a dad or a parent doesn't just stop at the financial responsibility. It just made me think about just a lot of the different areas that I wasn't there for my oldest daughter. it just kind of woke my senses up. It was kind of an awakening. I can't go back in time and change anything. I can't get a redo. But the things that I picked up from the program show me that I have a lot to offer. So here with this quote, we see that the presence of being there is multifaceted in its interpretation. It's not only financial support, but as this participant stated, it is being mentally present, which highlights here the importance of mindful connections in strengthening the family. A quick note on this point that mindfulness-based interventions is no new idea, and it is understood as the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experiences moment by moment. Some argue it's a necessary pillar to building emotional intelligence, and there are various models for mindfulness in parenting. Now, while Father 1 defined and acknowledges that good parenting is being there to support one's child and significant other, i.e. the family, Father 2 highlights for us that fatherhood programs can open our eyes to the different roles fathers may have in their child's lives, and that it is not all about financial support. Arguably, the quotes here pivot us towards a commonly shared ideology related to this work, and that is, fathering is teachable and learning how to parent is necessary, particularly for young fathers who want to engage in their child's life. So bringing us to slide 5, factors that influence father engagement. Building on young fathers engaging in their child's lives, there are various factors that serve as risk or protective factors. The image here depicts some of the risk and protective factors summarized in the tip sheet that will be discussed a bit later. So some of these icons represent factors such as your relationship factors, contextual factors such as employment status or economic stability, maternal factors, housing factors, legal factors, or a combination of the aforementioned. For example, studies have found that relationship status between a father and their child's mother, as well as the quality of the relationship, influences the father's engagement in their child's life. In one study, relationship status was a statistically significant predictor of paternal involvement. Generally, on average, fathers who were romantically involved and cohabitating with their child's mother were more involved than fathers who were romantically involved but did not cohabitate with their child's mother. Additionally, fathers who were no longer romantically involved with the child's mother were least likely to sustain involvement in their child's life. In the same study, fathers who were employed were more likely to sustain involvement in their child's life. Now, to be perfectly clear, it is not solely about fathers cohabitating and being romantically involved with their child's mother. It is the quality of the relationship between the father and child's mother that can foster or deteriorate a dad's involvement in their child's life and outcomes for the child. This is particularly evident in co-parenting research. Now, honing in on the risk factors some more. Young fathers are particularly at risk due to factors correlated with their age. They have lower socioeconomic status compared to older fathers, so lower income, they make fewer child support payments, have lower education, and higher school dropout rates. Young fathers are more prone to demonstrating antisocial behavior, being criminally convicted, gang involved, or taking on other risky behaviors such as substance abuse use or drunk driving, for example. And interestingly enough, the age crime curve runs parallel to some of these risk factors. When looking at crime rates by age, we usually see dramatic rises in crime rates between adolescents and in individuals' early 20s. So this isn't random necessarily for this age group. And young mothers are also faced with nearly identical risks due to their age as well. So given the various factors that impact the young father's ability to engage in their child's life, programs that help address these are essential to sustaining and improving father-child relationships and outcomes. Liz will continue from here to speak about this more in depth.
Thanks, Vic. Moving on to, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of an echo. Moving on to the next slide, the supporting young fathers engagement. The rest of our discussion provides information that can be found in the tip sheet pictured here. The link to this tip sheet was sent out with the webinar registration information and is provided in the chat box. The tip sheet is also available through the Exchange, which is a wonderful resource to you to search for information, connect to other grantees and potential partners, create personalized materials to help maximize the visibility of your program, access archived webinars, and more. The website is teenpregnancy.acf.hhs.gov. Moving on to the next slide, please. The Supporting Young Fathers tip sheet describes a number of elements of programs that can support young fathers' engagement with their children. These are somewhat universal ways any program working with young fathers can address their needs as dads, no matter the primary focus of the programming. Addressing these needs are great ways to get young fathers in the door and keep them engaged in your broader programming and services. For example, programs can integrate practical information about financial literacy or help disengaged youth get a GED or job training, deliver accessible and culturally relevant programming to facilitate effective parenting skills and positive engagement with their children, or focus on cultivating young fathers' sense of self-worth, positive attitudes, and relationship skills to improve their connections with partners, children, peers, and family members. What this might look like for you is using the education and career success services to appeal to young fathers' need to financially provide for their children. This may hook them on your program, and then you can provide the other more relationship-focused elements of prep. You can also bring back all education around effective communication to why and how it matters for career success, in addition to being good for relationships with children and the children's mother. We've heard from fatherhood programs we've worked with over the years that communication skills learned in the context of job training translate to better communication skills in other areas, like between family members. So this type of programming appeals to fathers while providing prep-specific education. Another way programming can address young fathers' needs is through specific programming around what fatherhood means in different cultural and ethnic contexts. So based on your population served, you can tailor the conversations to this. For example, in a Latino population, young fathers might be more amenable to prep messaging if corresponding fatherhood messaging focuses on the benefits of delaying additional children for the sake of the existing children, because many Latino cultural values emphasize doing right by the family, including children that are already in the family. These program elements relate directly to the risk and protective factors that Vic just described. When working with young fathers, it's important to be aware of the many different factors at play that shape their ability to be involved with their children, and to assess how your program can help to address these factors. As we just discussed, some of the elements can be infused in your own program, but others might require partnerships in the community. So you can provide access to supports and resources related to education, employment, substance use, housing, mental health services, and legal supports. But many of those types of services may be best provided through partnerships. Parenting and healthy relationship education and workshops, however, might be easier to provide in-house without partnerships, especially given some of the topics covered by PrEP already. Look for ways to integrate parenting and healthy relationship education in work you're already doing. As mentioned, communication skills can span multiple areas of youth lives and can be integrated in many topics as well. Same with building empathy. It's an important component of relationship health and the relationship between fathers and their child's mother, but it can extend to how they approach themselves and therefore be addressed in your app's education. It's important to have ways to assess the needs of the fathers in your community and to be able to connect young fathers to other services and supports if you're not able to provide them in-house. Next slide, please. So the next two slides provide strategies right from the tip sheet that a program could use to help engage young fathers as fathers in PrEP programming. The tip sheet isn't organized by these themes on this slide, but I like to think of the strategies as falling into one of three buckets. The first slide here shows two of these buckets: strategies to address young men's needs as dads, and strategies to address other needs and refer out for services. So these include addressing all fathers' financial stability, parenting skills, and healthy relationships, and then as needed, their self-sufficiency and life skills to promote independent living, physical and mental health, social integration. So what Vic was talking about with the age crime curve, addressing those antisocial behaviors, gang activity, criminal justice involvement, anything like that that can get in the way of not only your overall programming, but their ability to be a positively involved father. Housing stability and awareness of legal issues. Next slide, please. The third bucket is to ensure that your programming is father-friendly. Explore ideas for your program format, including culturally specific ways to talk about fatherhood. Consider program timing and think about who the participants will be as you create a physical space, as you create your messaging, and as you hire staff. Next slide. Okay, now we'd like to open the conversation up for questions from you all. Please submit them in the chat box and we will be happy to start the conversation. And since I can't see if there are questions popping up, we have some questions prepared that we can kind of pose to the group to get the conversation started. So Mary, let me know if we should move on to those.
Yeah, I think we can move on to those. We don't have any questions right now.
Okay, great. Vic, do you want to start with the first question?
Right.
Do you want me to read it and then, well, I guess, yeah, you start with the first questions and then we can move on.
Yeah, we can pose some questions to the group. We're trying to make this as interactive as possible. So the first question I have up here is, what are some of the challenges that you face when trying to engage fathers in programming?
And as grantees are typing in their responses to the chat box for that question, we do actually have one question that Karen Johnson submitted. She says, how do you become father friendly while teaching in a school setting?
That's such a good question. So yes, your setting might have limitations that kind of limit what you can do, but you can get creative with it. The first step would be to kind of do a full assessment of your space, kind of walk into it from the very beginning, like a new father entering your program, and do a visual inspection first off and see what is there that might be off-putting to young men and fathers. So an example that comes immediately to mind is programming held in programs that are initially designed for women. So there might be, you know, pink walls or magazines of like Teen Vogue in the waiting area, or pictures of women on the walls, but nothing of men, no kind of gender neutral colors, no materials around that would kind of not set off flags that they are like an afterthought there. So I think that that's the first thing, to just make sure that they are comfortable in the space and not immediately made to feel like it's a space made for women and mothers and not for them. And then the second thing that shouldn't really matter about the physical space so much is kind of looking for those same very subtle messaging in in the materials that you use. So I attended a webinar last week maybe where a clinician was talking about the work that he does with fathers. And he was saying that the programs that are far and away the most successful are those that use materials that were designed and validated with fathers instead of trying to use materials designed for mothers and adapting them for fathers. And I think that that kind of illustrates this point, that you want to make sure that there are no kind of subtle underlying messages that dads are secondary or they're not kind of as important as caregivers or parents, or messages that can just make them feel undermined as fathers. I'm sure that a lot of the prep programming is kind of gender neutral or designed for both women and men, but when it comes to parenting specific messaging, that's a really important thing to look for. Vic, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can add like one or two things there. So the school setting isn't necessarily my forte, but I think there are some basic things you do look at regardless of where you go. And I'm thinking of fatherhood programs, young fatherhood programs that were targeted at young men returning from, juvenile facilities or adult correctional facilities. And one of the things that you mentioned was assessing the physical site, Liz, and I think the same thing plays a role within the school setting. So the physical site, the facilitator himself, as well as facilitation style. Those are the first three things that come to my mind. And with this particular young father parenting program, they mixed it up with facilitators in that they made sure some of them were representative of the fathers that were coming into their programming. So about 50% of the fathers were formerly incarcerated or justice involved to some extent, and went through proper training. And it kind of brought forward this level of affinity that I haven't seen in other types of programs, and at least that's from the observations I did on that study. And another thing that stuck out was facilitation style. So I think that also applies to the setting of the school. And the facilitation style was heavily experiential learning. You got your tasks, you did this, you did your homework, came back, you reflected on it, you engaged, you spoke about it. So that's kind of three things that come to my mind when I think of father-friendly settings.
And Vic, you're reminding me of one other thing. The timing of the program could be very important as well. I'm not sure if you're kind of limited to the time frame where you can offer programming given it's in a school, but I know youth, especially high school aged ones, are kind of forced into certain schedules. Their lives are very scheduled, and for dads in particular, that can be really challenging because they might be trying to juggle school and a job and visitation with their child, or just a number of other things that other youth don't necessarily have to think about. And they're not going to give up, paying for something for their kid by missing like a day at work for this type of programming, or like a day with their kid if they only have them once every 2 weeks or something like that. So just being understanding and accommodating as much as possible in terms of timing can go a long way. I think especially for kids this age, because they're kind of told repeatedly that they need to do something when adults tell them to, and the other things that they have going on aren't as important.
We also have another question. Anthony Cox says, are there statistics that show a different level of success for programs where these principles are taught male to male, or does gender matter? And I think Vic was just talking about that, but you may have more that you want to say.
Yeah, so this is highly debated. I don't know that there's a firm answer that the research can kind of relay. I am in line, so I'm very tempted to say that what Vic was saying about facilitation style and the ability to kind of connect with the youth, and if there's something there where they can see themselves in the person, so whether that's gender, whether that's being from the same community, whether that's race, whether that's a shared language, something like that is important. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a male facilitator teaching this programming. But the research that I know around that is kind of with fathers in general, not specifically with young fathers. And thinking to the youth that I've worked with and being reminded of when I was a teen, I think I would have been more comfortable around, like, I think that there is like an added level of comfort when you're kind of with like a teenage male with a male facilitator. So I don't think it's essential, but it helps. Vic, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So even with that, let's unpack that a bit real quick. So with what I mentioned about the affinity in the theme of affinity that came forward in the observations I did in this particular study, what was behind that in having facilitators that were formerly incarcerated was this feeling of empathy that was demonstrated throughout just the overall program. So even during the timeouts and the breaks, it just this empathy came across to the participants, which was present in them saying, yeah, I feel that connection to this facilitator. And there were moments where they were facilitators who were formerly incarcerated who didn't have the best rapport with their clients. So I don't think there's any steadfast rule there. And I think when we unpack it, it comes down to a level of empathy that can be communicated towards individuals in the programming. And I think that's also where the emotional intelligence pieces come in, and being mindful comes forward, not just for the participants as they learn how to parent, but even for the facilitators as they model the behaviors, which they should be doing, that they encourage their participants to learn. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I guess Vic's point is making me think that there are two components here. There's the getting the dads in the door, where like the maleness of the facilitator might really help with that. But then what's going to get them to stay there is exactly what Vic's talking about. And we've done a lot of program visits with fatherhood programs in my research, and there have been many female facilitators that the young dads of all ages, but particularly the young dads, just love, and they identify with them kind of as a mother figure or grandmother figure, because she's empathetic and can connect with them. And in a lot of cases, she was from a similar background as the youth, like from a same neighborhood or, you know, whatever the case. But the fact that she was female did not negatively affect her ability to be a good facilitator.
Right. And depending on what type of performance metrics are in place for your program, it'll be worth the time to, you know, sit down and reflect on the facilitation and how it went for the facilitator. So actually sitting back, reflecting on were people speaking up or engaged in this particular session? Do you notice any differences when you facilitate versus when I facilitate? I mean, the thing here is we always look for, you know, a cookie cutter way of doing things. And we have to understand we have models and things we can follow, but there's always going to be these things, these elements we can't capture. And we have to sit down and reflect and tailor how we facilitate and how we structure our programs to our clientele. It just, when we're dealing with humans and lives, it just can't be placed into boxes. So simple. So I don't really have any stats off the top of my head. I wish I did, though.
We don't have any additional questions at this time, but there have been some great comments in the comment box, and I definitely appreciate grantees for chiming in. Although I realize it's 4:30, so this has been a really great talk. I guess, Liz, do you want to finish up, or Vic?
Sure. Yeah. If you could go to the resources page, slide 14, I just want to point out that there are some great resources here, also available in the tip sheet, so be sure to check them out. They provide more information about the questions that have come up and go more in depth about what Vic and I were talking about today. And then the next slide provides our email addresses. Please feel free to email us. We are happy to continue the conversation or answer any questions that you guys think of later.
And Cameron, if you could go to the last slide. We are so excited to have you guys join us today and really appreciate you attending. This is a slightly different format than what we usually do for webinars. So we're going to try, we've been trying, or this is our first time trying out sort of like a TED Talk style talk where it's a very short sharing of information and question and answer. So we'd love to hear from you about your experience today. And the webpage for the survey should pop up once we end the meeting. And if you're not able to complete the survey now, we'll also send you that via email. But thank you so much and appreciate you all for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.